The cantina on Nexus Prime buzzed with the usual mix of traders, smugglers, and veterans from a dozen different worlds. Purple smoke drifted through the air from exotic cigars, while aliens of every shape and size shared drinks and stories. In the darkest corner of the establishment, Commander Zethkar sat alone with his third bottle of fermented plasma wine. His chitinous exoskeleton bore the scars of countless battles. Burns from plasma rifles crossed his chest like medals of dishonor. Deep gouges from human kinetic weapons marked his arms. His compound eyes, once bright yellow, had dulled to the color of old amber. The other patrons gave him a wide berth, sensing the dangerous aura that surrounded the Krillian veteran. Veltara approached his table with the nervous energy of a young journalist hunting for her first big story. Her own carapace gleamed with the unmarked perfection of someone who had never seen combat. She clutched a recording device in her four-fingered hand and cleared her throat softly. Commander Zethkar, I am Veltara from the Krillian News Network. I was hoping you might share your experiences from the Terran War for our documentary series. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or annoyance. He took another long drink from his bottle before speaking in the gravelly voice of someone who had breathed too much battle smoke. Go away, young one. Find someone else to interview. There are plenty of heroes in this cantina who will tell you glorious tales of victory. Veltara did not move. She had researched this interview for months and knew that Zethkar was one of the few high-ranking officers who had survived the entire campaign against the humans. His perspective would be invaluable. Commander, our people still do not understand what happened during the war. The official reports speak of tactical withdrawals and strategic repositioning, but everyone knows we were defeated. How did the mighty Krillian Empire lose to such a primitive species? The veteran's eyes fixed on her with sudden intensity. His claws scraped against the metal table as memories he had tried to drown in alcohol came flooding back. The humans, those terrifying, beautiful, insane creatures who had changed everything the Krillians thought they knew about warfare. Primitive, he repeated slowly. Is that what they are calling the humans now? Primitive? He gestured for her to sit. Against her better judgment, Veltara slid into the booth across from him. The recording device hummed to life as Zethkar began to speak. 3 cycles ago, our intelligence division classified the humans as a Class 7 species. Limited space travel, basic energy weapons, simple military organization. We had conquered 17 species before them, each one more advanced than these mammals from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. Zethkar paused to drain the rest of his bottle. A service drone immediately delivered another without being asked. The veteran was clearly a regular customer. The High Command selected their colony world of New Haven for our first demonstration of force. A small planet with maybe 3 million. Human settlers, mining operations, agricultural communes, a few industrial centers. Nothing that should have posed any challenge to the 7th Fleet. The Krillian commander's voice took on the cadence of someone reciting a military briefing, but his eyes held a haunted quality that spoke of deeper truths. Admiral Haskatel commanded. Our forces from the flagship Eternal Conquest. 47 vessels including 6 dreadnoughts and 12 battlecruisers. We had enough firepower to glass the entire planet if necessary. The operation was supposed to last 72 hours. Veltara leaned forward, her recording device capturing every word. This was exactly the kind of first-hand account that her editors craved. What happened when you arrived at New Haven, Zethkar's? Mandibles clicked again, this time definitely in dark amusement. We broadcast the standard surrender demand on all frequencies. Submit to the Krillian Empire, accept relocation to designated zones, and your deaths will be quick and merciful. Most species respond within an hour. The smart ones surrender immediately. He took another drink before continuing. The humans responded in 37 minutes. Their transmission came from the planetary capital. A middle-aged human male wearing what appeared to be agricultural clothing. He looked directly into the camera and spoke in perfect galactic standard. The veteran's voice dropped to almost a whisper as he recalled the moment that should have warned them about what was coming. This human, this farmer, or whatever he was, smiled at us. Actually smiled. Then he said something that still gives me nightmares. He said, "We got your message, Bug Boy. Here's our response. Come and take it." Veltara's antennae twitched with confusion. The phrase meant nothing to her, but clearly it had significance to the humans. That was their entire response. No negotiations, no pleas for mercy, no attempts to buy time. Just those 5 words, and then they cut the transmission. Admiral Hascatel was so surprised that he actually laughed. He ordered the invasion to begin immediately. Zethkar's claws drummed against the table as his memories turned darker. I commanded the assault on the human settlement called Riverside, a small town near the equator with maybe 50,000 inhabitants. My dropships carried 2,000 elite shock troopers. We expected to secure the area within 6 hours and begin processing the population. The veteran paused, lost in thought. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of genuine respect mixed with terror. The landing zone intelligence had selected was a field just outside the town. Flat terrain, good visibility, no obvious defensive positions. Perfect for a textbook assault. We came down in 12 drop pods just after dawn, local time. Veltara waited patiently as Zethkar gathered his thoughts. She could see that whatever he was about to tell her was still difficult for him to process. The field was empty when we landed. Not a single human in sight. My tactical officer reported no energy signatures, no movement on the sensors. It was like they had simply vanished. Some of my troops started joking that the humans had run away before we even arrived. The Krillian commander's eyes grew distant as he relived that morning 3 years ago. That was when we met Jake Morrison and Lisa Brooks. Not met exactly. More like they introduced themselves by trying to kill us in ways we had never imagined possible. Veltara's compound eyes widened. This was not the kind of story she had expected to hear about primitive humans facing advanced alien technology. The first explosion happened while we were still forming up. Someone had buried mining charges under the landing zone and triggered them remotely. 3 of my drop pods were completely destroyed. 72 shock troopers dead before we had even seen the enemy. Zethkar's voice grew harder as he continued. Then the shooting started, but not from where we expected. These humans were firing from concealed positions hundreds of meters away, long-range kinetic weapons with incredible accuracy. They were picking off my troops one by one while staying completely invisible. The veteran took another long drink before delivering the line that would haunt Veltara for years to come. That was when I realized we were not fighting a primitive species. We were fighting something far more dangerous. We were fighting humans. Zethkar ordered another bottle before continuing his story. The purple smoke in the cantina seemed to grow thicker as more patrons arrived for the evening shift. Veltara checked her recording device and waited for the veteran to speak again. After the initial attack at the landing zone, my surviving troops took cover behind the wreckage of our drop pods. Standard Krillian doctrine called for immediate retaliation with overwhelming force, but we could not see the enemy. They were using the terrain like I had never witnessed before. The commander's claws traced patterns on the table as he remembered that terrible day. Jake Morrison appeared first. Not appeared exactly because we still could not see him clearly. Our sensors detected movement in a grove of trees about 400 meters north of our position. My weapons officer locked onto the signature and fired a plasma burst that should have vaporized everything within a 50-meter radius. Zethkar paused to take a drink, his compound eyes reflecting the dim lights of the cantina. The trees exploded exactly as expected, but Morrison was not there anymore. Somehow he had moved to a different position and was already firing at us from a rocky outcrop to our east. His weapon was primitive by our standards, just a chemical, propellant rifle, but he was hitting targets at ranges that should have been impossible. Veltara leaned forward, fascinated by this account of human tactics. How could a primitive weapon be effective against Krillian armor? The veteran's mandibles clicked in what might have been admiration. Morrison was not trying to penetrate our armor with his rifle. He was aiming for our sensors, our communication, equipment, the joints in our exoskeletons. Every shot was precisely placed to cause maximum disruption with minimal firepower. It was like he understood our technology better than we did. Zethkar's voice grew quieter as he continued. While Morrison kept us pinned down, Lisa Brooks was working her way around to our flanks. We did not know about her until she started attacking our supply lines. She had somehow acquired explosives from the human mining operations and was using them to destroy our equipment. The Krillian commander shook his head slowly. Brooks moved through that terrain like she had been born there. Our thermal sensors could not track her because she understood how to use the local environment to mask her heat signature. She would strike at our vehicles and disappear before we could respond. Veltara tried to imagine how two individual humans could pose such a threat to an entire Krillian assault force. Surely your superior numbers and technology gave you an advantage, Zethkar's laugh was bitter and filled with old pain. Numbers meant nothing when we could not find our targets. Technology was useless when the humans refused to fight according to any logical pattern. They did not try to hold ground or defend fixed positions. Instead, they turned the entire battlefield into a trap. The veteran took another long drink before describing the horror that followed. On the second day, Brooks managed to breach our command vehicle while we were dealing with another of Morrison's attacks. She did not try to steal intelligence or sabotage our equipment. Instead, she left behind a message written in perfect galactic standard. Zethkar's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The message said, "You picked the wrong planet. Leave now or we will show you what humans do to invaders." It was signed with her name and included detailed schematics of our own vehicles. She had studied our technology and found weaknesses that our own engineers had missed. Veltara's antennae twitched with nervous energy as she processed this information. How did she obtain such detailed knowledge of Krillian military equipment? The commander's eyes grew distant as he remembered. We learned later that the humans had been monitoring our communications and studying our tactics from the moment we entered their system. They were not a primitive species caught by surprise. They were a species that had been preparing for war. Zethkar paused to order food from a passing service drone before continuing his account. The third day brought something even worse. Morrison and Brooks stopped running and started hunting. They began picking off my troops one by one, but not with quick kills. They would wound a soldier and then wait for others to come to his aid before striking again. The veteran's claws scraped against the metal table. It was psychological warfare of a type we had never encountered. Every rescue attempt became another trap. Every medical evacuation became another opportunity for them to demonstrate that nowhere was safe. My troops started to crack under the pressure. Veltara could hear the pain in his voice as he described the systematic destruction of his unit's morale. On the fourth day, we received reinforcements from orbit, 2 full companies of fresh shock, troopers with heavy weapons and armor support. The humans had been monitoring our communications, so they knew help was coming. Zethkar's voice took on a tone of grudging respect. Morrison and Brooks did not retreat when they saw our reinforcements landing. Instead, they adapted their tactics and began targeting our heavy equipment. Brooks had somehow constructed improvised explosives that could penetrate our vehicle. Armor. The commander shook his head in disbelief at the memory. She crawled under one of our armored personnel carriers in broad daylight while Morrison provided covering fire from 3 different positions. We still do not know how he moved between those positions so quickly. Brooks planted her device and escaped before we even realized what had happened. Veltara was beginning to understand why the Krillian forces had struggled against these humans. The explosion disabled the vehicle and trapped 12 of my troops inside. When we tried to extract them, Morrison opened fire from his concealed position. Every time we approached the wreckage, he would wound another soldier. Zethkar's voice grew harder as he continued. Brooks appeared on our communications frequency that afternoon. She offered to allow medical evacuation of our wounded in exchange for our withdrawal from the immediate area. When my commanding officer refused, she calmly explained what would happen next. The veteran paused, clearly struggling with the memory. She told us that the humans of Riverside had decided we were not welcome on their world. She said they would continue fighting until every Krillian soldier was dead or gone. Then she said something that still haunts me. Veltara waited as Zethkar gathered his courage to continue. Brooke said, "Commander, you should know that we are not even soldiers. Jake is a construction worker and I am a school teacher. If two civilians can do this much damage to your army, imagine what will happen when our real military arrives." The Krillian commander finished his bottle and stared into the empty glass. That was when I began to understand that we had made a terrible mistake coming to this world. The cantina had grown quieter as the evening progressed. Most of the day shift workers had gone home, leaving only the serious drinkers and those with nowhere else to go. Zethkar stared at his reflection in the bottom of his empty glass before signaling for another bottle. Veltara could see that the memories were becoming more difficult for him to share. 2 weeks after the disaster at Riverside, Admiral Haskatel decided that ground operations were taking too long. He ordered the fleet to engage the human orbital installations directly. We thought space combat would be different. Up there, our technological advantages would matter. The veteran's compound eyes reflected the dim lighting as he remembered the battle that changed everything. I was transferred to the command deck of the Dreadnought Void Render for the orbital assault. Captain Thekmol commanded the ship while I served as ground forces liaison. We had 47 vessels against maybe 12 human ships, and 3 space stations. Zethkar took a long drink before continuing. The human fleet was commanded by Admiral Scott Barnes from a vessel they called the UCS Defiance. Their ships were smaller than ours, with weaker armor and less powerful weapons. By every tactical analysis, we should have destroyed them within hours. Veltara adjusted her recording device as the veteran's voice grew more strained. The battle began exactly as our simulations predicted. We formed up in standard attack formation and advanced on their positions. The humans arranged their ships in a defensive screen around their orbital stations. Everything seemed normal until we came within weapons range. The Krillian commander paused, his claws drumming nervously against the table. Captain Sarah Mitchell commanded a human destroyer called the UCS Wolverine. When our fleet opened fire, she did something that violated every rule of space combat we had ever learned. Instead of maneuvering for a better firing position, she aimed her ship directly at our battlecruiser Crushing Dawn and engaged her engines at maximum thrust. Veltara's antenna twitched with confusion. "She was attempting to ram your vessel." Zethkar's mandibles clicked in grim confirmation. Mitchell's ship accelerated to ramming speed while taking fire from 6 different Krillian vessels. Her destroyer was coming apart around her, but she held course. We tried to contact her ship, thinking there had been some kind of navigation malfunction. The veteran's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Mitchell responded to our hails personally. She appeared on our communication screen with her bridge burning around her and said, "Tell your admiral that humans do not surrender." Then she cut the transmission and rammed the Crushing Dawn at full speed. Zethkar shook his head slowly as he relived the moment. The explosion tore through the battlecruiser's engine section and spread to 3 other vessels in our formation. Over 800 Krillian crew members died in seconds. We had never seen anything like it. No species sacrifices an entire ship and crew for such minimal tactical advantage. Veltara struggled to understand the human logic. Surely this was an act of desperation rather than strategy. The commander's laugh was bitter and filled with old fear. That is what we thought until pilot Tony Rodriguez proved us wrong. His fighter was damaged and leaking atmosphere when he broke off from his squadron and headed straight for our main gun battery. My tactical officer assumed he was trying to escape and ignored him. Zethkar's claws scraped against the metal table as the memory intensified. Rodriguez's fighter was dying around him, But instead of ejecting or trying to reach safety, he set his nuclear reactor to overload and flew directly into our primary weapons array. The explosion tore through 17 decks and killed over 300 of our crew. The veteran took another drink, his hands shaking slightly. Captain Thekmol ordered all fighters to be treated as potential ramming threats. We began using our point defense systems against individual human pilots, but they kept coming. Every damaged fighter became a guided missile. Every crippled ship became a potential bomb. Veltara was beginning to understand why the space battle had been so traumatic for the Krillian forces. The worst incident happened when our boarding parties captured the human vessel UCS Marathon. Captain Helen Torres had been forced to surrender her ship after taking critical damage to her engines and life support systems. Zethkar's voice grew quiet and haunted. Standard procedure called for our Marines to secure the vessel and process the crew for interrogation. 200 of our best troops boarded the Marathon, while Captain Torres and her officers were held in the ship's conference room. The commander paused, clearly struggling with what came next. I was monitoring the boarding operation from the void, Render's command deck. Everything seemed to be proceeding normally until Captain Torres requested permission to address her crew over the ship's communication system. Our boarding commander agreed, thinking she was going to order them to cooperate. Veltara leaned forward as Zethkar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Torres appeared on every screen throughout her ship. She looked directly into the camera and spoke in a calm, steady voice. She said, "Crew of the Marathon, this is your captain. We have fought with honor and served with distinction. Now we have one final duty to perform." The veteran's compound eyes reflected old pain as he continued. She paused for a moment, then smiled and said, "Tell Earth we held the line." Then she activated her ship's self-destruct sequence. Zethkar had to stop speaking for several minutes while he composed himself. The explosion destroyed the Marathon instantly, killing Captain Torres, her entire crew, and all 200 Krillian Marines aboard. 2 of our boarding craft were caught in the blast and destroyed. A third vessel was severely damaged. Veltara could barely comprehend what she was hearing. They killed themselves rather than allow capture. The commander nodded slowly. That was when Admiral Haskell realized what we were facing. The humans were not fighting to win in any conventional sense. They were fighting to inflict maximum casualties on our forces regardless of the cost to themselves. Zethkar ordered another bottle before continuing. The space battle lasted 3 days. We destroyed every human vessel and captured all 3 orbital stations, but our losses were catastrophic. 17 ships damaged or destroyed, over 4,000 crew members dead, and an entire fleet demoralized by an enemy that treated death as a tactical option. The veteran's voice took on a tone of grudging respect mixed with horror. Admiral Barnes went down with his flagship rather than surrender. His final transmission was broadcast on all frequencies, so every ship in both fleets could hear it. He said, "This is Admiral Barnes to all vessels. We may be dying today, but we are not defeated. Earth will remember, Earth will come, and when they do, you will learn what it means to fight real humans." Zethkar finished his drink and stared into the empty glass. That was when we realized that New Haven was not the end of our war with humanity. It was just the beginning. The cantina had emptied considerably as the night deepened. Only a few hardcore drinkers remained at scattered tables, nursing their drinks and their memories. Zethkar had consumed enough alcohol to kill most species, but his voice remained, steady, as he continued his tale. Veltara checked her recording device again, ensuring she captured every word of this unprecedented account. After the space battle, Admiral Haskell ordered a full planetary assault. He deployed the shock legions to New Haven's main continent with orders to crush all human resistance within 1 week. We had learned from our mistakes at Riverside and came prepared for unconventional warfare. The veteran's claws traced nervous patterns on the table surface. I was assigned to the 3rd Shock Legion under General Vextar. We landed at the northern continent's primary spaceport with 12,000 troops, heavy armor, and air support. The humans had abandoned the facility, but we expected that by now. Zethkar paused to order another bottle, his movements becoming slightly unsteady. The spaceport was completely intact when we arrived. No sabotage, no booby traps, no signs of defensive preparation. It seemed too easy, but our scouts confirmed that the area was clear. We established our command base in the main terminal building, Veltara, waited patiently as the commander gathered his thoughts. The first sign of trouble came when we tried to advance inland toward the human city of New Hope. The roads had been destroyed, but not with explosives. Someone had used construction equipment to dig massive trenches across every highway and railway line. The veteran's voice took on a tone of grudging admiration. We learned later that the human engineer responsible was a man named Roger Clark. He had worked for the Colonial Transportation Department and knew exactly how to cripple our vehicle movements. Every bridge was rigged to collapse, every tunnel was blocked, every major intersection was turned into an impassable crater. Zethkar took a long drink before continuing. Clark had stayed behind after the civilian evacuation to complete his sabotage work. When our advanced scouts finally caught up with him, he was placing charges under the Meridian Bridge. This was the only route across the Razor River Canyon for 300 kilometers in either direction. The commander's compound eyes reflected, old pain as he remembered. Our troops surrounded Clark's position and demanded his surrender. He was just one human with basic demolition equipment against an entire armored column. Logic said he should have given up immediately. Veltara leaned forward, anticipating another example of human stubbornness. Clark appeared on our communications frequency and spoke directly to Colonel Hiskaval, our advance commander. He said, "Colonel, I have enough explosives under this bridge to drop it into the canyon. You can try to stop me, but I guarantee this crossing will be destroyed either way." Zethkar's mandibles clicked softly. Colonel Hiskaval tried to negotiate. He offered Clark safe passage off the planet in exchange for leaving the bridge intact. Clark listened to the entire offer, then laughed and said, "Colonel, you still do not understand humans. We do not negotiate with invaders." The veteran's voice grew quieter as he relived the moment. Clark triggered his explosives while our troops were still trying to reach him. The Meridian Bridge collapsed into the canyon, taking him with it. Our entire armored column was stranded on the wrong side of the river for 6 days, while engineers found an alternate route. Veltara could hear the frustration in Zethkar's voice as he described the systematic delays. Every human we encountered followed the same pattern. They would fight from impossible positions until the last moment, then destroy whatever we were trying to capture. There was no logic to it by our standards. The commander ordered food from a passing service drone before. Continuing. The worst incident happened at a human field hospital near the city of Haven's Rest. Our intelligence indicated that the facility contained wounded human soldiers and valuable medical supplies. General Vextar ordered a full assault to capture the site intact. Zethkar's claws drummed against the table as the memory intensified. The hospital was run by a doctor named Alan Rivers and a nurse called Patricia Stone. When our forces surrounded the building, they refused our demands for surrender. Dr. Rivers contacted us directly and said they would not abandon their patients. The veteran's voice took on a tone of confused respect. We offered them the standard terms: surrender the wounded soldiers for interrogation, and they could continue treating civilian casualties under Krillian supervision. Dr. Rivers rejected the offer immediately. Veltara tried to understand the human logic. Surely medical personnel would prioritize saving lives over military resistance? Zethkar's laugh was bitter and filled with old confusion. That is what we thought until Dr. Rivers explained their position. He said that as medical officers, they had sworn an oath to protect their patients from harm. He considered our interrogation methods to be harm. The commander shook his head. Slowly. General Vextar gave them one final ultimatum: surrender within 1 hour, or face the consequences. Dr. Rivers and Nurse Stone spent that hour distributing weapons to every patient who could still fight. The veteran's voice dropped to almost a whisper. When our assault began, we discovered that the hospital had been turned into a fortress. Wounded human soldiers were fighting from their medical beds. Dr. Rivers and Nurse Stone had armed themselves and were coordinating the defense while still treating casualties. Zethkar had to pause for several minutes before he could continue. The battle lasted 4 hours. Every room had to be taken separately. The humans fought with surgical instruments when their ammunition ran out. Dr. Rivers died defending the children's ward while Nurse Stone held the emergency room until the very end. Veltara could barely comprehend the scene he was describing. When we finally secured the hospital, we found that every piece of medical equipment had been sabotaged beyond repair. The humans had destroyed their own supplies rather than let us use them. Even in death, they denied us any advantage. The commander's voice grew even quieter. General Vextar was so disturbed by the hospital incident that he requested reassignment to a different sector. He told Admiral Haskatel that fighting humans was destroying the morale of his troops. Zethkar finished another bottle and stared into the empty glass. That was when the Admiral realized that conventional military tactics were useless against an enemy that considered death preferable to defeat. We were not fighting soldiers anymore. We were fighting an entire species that had declared war on the concept of surrender. The veteran looked up at Veltara with eyes that had seen too much. And we were losing that war one battle at a time. The cantina was nearly empty now, with only Zethkar and Veltara remaining at their corner table. Empty bottles surrounded the veteran like monuments to his memories. The purple smoke had cleared, leaving the air stale and heavy. Veltara could see that sharing these stories was taking a terrible toll on the old warrior, but she needed to hear the end. 6 weeks into the ground campaign, our casualty reports reached the High Command on Krylos Prime. We had lost over 15,000 troops capturing a single human colony world. The numbers made no sense to our military analysts. Zethkar's voice had grown hoarse from hours of talking and drinking. Admiral Haskatel called a strategy meeting aboard his flagship. Every senior officer attended, including myself. We were supposed to develop new tactics for dealing with human resistance, but none of us knew where to begin. The veteran's claws scraped against the table surface as he remembered that terrible conference. The Admiral showed us intelligence reports from across the planet. Every human settlement was following the same pattern. Civilian evacuations, infrastructure sabotage, guerrilla warfare, and last stands that inflicted maximum casualties on our forces. Veltara adjusted her recording device as Zethkar continued. The breaking point came during the Battle of Stryker Valley. Colonel Frank Davis commanded a human defense force of maybe 200 soldiers against 3 full Kryllian regiments. By every tactical analysis, they should have been overrun within hours. The commander paused to take another drink, his movements becoming increasingly unsteady. Davis positioned his troops in the valley's narrowest section where our numerical advantage meant nothing. He used the terrain like a weapon, forcing us to attack through killing fields where every approach was covered by human fire. Zethkar's voice took on a tone of reluctant admiration. The battle lasted 5 days, 5 days of constant fighting where we gained maybe 50 meters per day at the cost of hundreds of casualties. Davis rotated his troops through defensive positions like he had unlimited reinforcements. The veterans' compound eyes reflected the dim cantina lights as he relived the horror. On the 3rd day, we intercepted human communications and learned the truth. Davis was buying time for civilian evacuations from 3 nearby settlements. He was sacrificing his entire force to save people who were not even soldiers. Veltara could hear the confusion in Zethkar's voice as he struggled to understand human motivations. General Kekthor commanded our assault forces. He offered Davis terms for surrender multiple times, but the human colonel refused every proposal. Davis said his orders were to hold the valley for 7 days, and he intended to follow those orders regardless of the cost. The commander's claws drummed nervously against the table. On the 4th day, Davis contacted General Kekthor directly. He said that if we withdrew from the valley, he would allow us to evacuate our wounded without interference. The general was so surprised by this offer that he actually considered accepting it. Zethkar shook his head slowly. Admiral Haskell overruled the proposal and ordered the assault to continue. That was when we learned what desperation could drive humans to accomplish. The veteran's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Davis had prepared fallback positions throughout the valley using mining charges and construction equipment. Every time we overran one defensive line, the humans would retreat to the next position and collapse the ground behind them. Veltara waited patiently as Zethkar gathered his thoughts. On the fifth day, we finally reached Davis's final position. He had maybe 30 soldiers left alive, all of them wounded. Logic said they should have surrendered, but logic meant nothing to humans facing defeat. The commander's voice grew strained as he continued. Davis appeared on our communications one last time. He was bleeding from multiple wounds, and his voice was weak, but his message was clear. He said, "General, you have spent 5 days and 3,000 soldiers to advance 5 kilometers. We call that a victory." Zethkar had to pause for several minutes before he could continue speaking. Then Davis triggered his final surprise. He had rigged the entire valley floor with explosives salvaged from the mining operations. The explosion created a landslide that buried his position along with our entire advance guard. The veterans. Claws scraped against the metal table as the memory intensified. Over 800 Krillian soldiers died in that landslide. Davis and his remaining troops were buried with them, but they had achieved their objective. The civilian evacuations were complete. Veltara could barely comprehend the scale of sacrifice she was hearing about. That same week, we received intelligence reports that changed everything. Earth had dispatched a relief fleet to New Haven. Admiral Scott Barnes's final message had reached his homeworld, and they were sending their real military forces. Zethkar's voice took on a tone of genuine fear. Major Lisa Turner commanded the advance elements of the Earth fleet. She contacted Admiral Haskell directly when her ships entered the system. Her message was brief and terrifying. The commander finished another bottle before continuing. Turner said, "Admiral, you have been fighting human colonists and civilians for 2 months. Now you get to fight human soldiers. We suggest you reconsider your position." The veteran's compound eyes reflected old terror as he remembered. Captain Kevin Stone led the first wave of human reinforcements. These were not colonists or civilians. These were professional soldiers, with military equipment and training. They hit our positions like a force of nature. Zethkar's voice grew quieter as he approached the end of his story. Admiral Haskell called an emergency meeting of all senior staff. The casualty projections for fighting Earth's military forces were staggering. Our analysts estimated that conquering humanity would require the complete extermination of their species. The commander looked up at Veltara with eyes that had seen too much. The High Command on Krillos Prime made the decision to withdraw. Not because we could not win, but because victory would cost more than it was worth. We were facing a species that would fight to the last individual rather than accept subjugation. Veltara leaned forward as Zethkar delivered his final words. The official reports called it a strategic withdrawal. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. We retreated because we finally understood what humans were. They were not just another species to be conquered. They were something the galaxy had never seen before. The veteran's voice dropped to a whisper. They were a people who considered death preferable to defeat, who would sacrifice themselves for strangers, and who possessed a capacity for violence matched only by their willingness to use it. We thought we were conquering primitives, but instead we discovered we had awakened something that the galaxy was not prepared to face. Zethkar finished his final bottle and stared into the empty glass. The humans do not just fight wars, young journalist. They become war itself. And that is why the Krillian Empire will never again make the mistake of underestimating the species from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. The cantina fell silent as the veteran's story came to an end, leaving only the hum of ventilation systems and the weight of terrible knowledge hanging in the air between them.